The girl lived where the land seemed forgotten by God and remembered only by wolves. Her name was Eliza Hawthorne, and she occupied a narrow strip of valley hemmed in by black pine ridges and frozen creeks, a place where winter lingered like a curse and silence pressed against the ears until one learned to breathe inside it. Eliza's cabin stood alone, crooked with age, built by a father long buried beneath a pine cross that no longer bore his name. She rose before dawn every morning, fed the mule, split wood with hands scarred and strong, and spoke to no one for weeks at a time except the wind. Loneliness was not a feeling for her anymore. It was a condition, like the thin mountain air or the ache in her bones when the cold came early. She had learned not to hope for company because hope, in such places, froze people faster than the snow. That winter came hard and early, clawing down from the north with storms that howled through the valley like living things. Wolves moved closer to human ground when the elk vanished and the rabbits thinned, and Eliza heard them most nights, long, searching cries that rolled down the ridges and slipped under her door. She kept her rifle loaded and her lantern trimmed, though she rarely feared the wolves themselves. They hunted for survival. It was men she had learned to fear, the drifting kind who passed through and left ruin behind. Still, the wolves that year sounded different, hungrier, bolder, less afraid of fire or noise. On one such evening, as dusk bled purple into the snowfields, Eliza heard something that did not belong. It was not a wolf's cry, nor the crack of ice, nor the wind tearing at trees. It was a human sound, raw and broken, carried weakly through the trees. A man's voice shouting once, then again, before dissolving into something closer to pain than speech. Eliza froze mid-step outside her cabin, breath fogging the air, heart pounding, as instinct screamed at her to go inside and bolt the door. No one with sense wandered these ridges in winter, and those who did rarely survived long enough to cry for help. The wolves answered the sound before she could decide. Their howls rose in chorus, nearer than before, encircling something or someone moving through the trees. Eliza's hand tightened on her rifle. She stood there for a long moment, caught between fear and a kind of stubborn mercy she had inherited from a father who once taught her that leaving a man to die was a sin the mountains would never forgive. She cursed herself under her breath, pulled on her coat, and followed the sound into the timber, lantern swinging low, rifle ready. The snow grew deep fast, swallowing her boots, but the sounds guided her unerringly. She smelled blood before she saw him. The man lay half-slumped against a fallen log, his horse nowhere in sight, his coat torn and dark with red. His face was pale beneath a beard rimed with frost, eyes half-lidded but alive, unfocused with pain and fever. Wolves moved at the edge of the lantern light, their eyes catching the glow like scattered embers. Eliza raised the rifle and fired once into the air, the crack echoing sharp and final through the valley. The wolves hesitated, snarled, and faded back into the trees, not gone but waiting. The man tried to lift his head when he saw her, but failed, a rough sound tearing from his chest. Eliza dropped to her knees beside him without thinking, dragging him further into the lantern's glow. He was heavy, solid, built like someone who worked land and cattle, not a drifter, though his clothes were worn and his boots nearly split. She could see the bite marks on his leg, where a wolf had caught him, deep and ugly, the blood already stiffening in the cold. She pressed her scarf against the wound and spoke to him, her voice steady despite the fear threading through it. "Don't try to move," she said. "You'll bleed out if you do." His eyes flickered toward her, a ghost of awareness passing through them. "Didn't think angels came this far north," he rasped, before coughing hard and slumping again. Eliza snorted despite herself. "I'm no angel," she muttered, already hauling him up, bracing his weight against her shoulder. "And you're lucky I'm stubborn." The wolves watched from the dark as she dragged him inch by inch toward the cabin, her muscles screaming, the lantern light bobbing wildly. She fired again when a shape moved too close, shouting curses at beasts that understood only hunger. By the time she reached her door, her arms shook with exhaustion and fear, but she did not stop. She kicked the door open, dragged the man inside, and slammed it shut behind them. the sound echoing like a final verdict. Against the night, Eliza worked through the night without stopping, her hands moving with the practiced calm of someone who had learned medicine from necessity rather than books. She cleaned the wound with boiled water and liquor, ignoring the man's groans as he drifted in and out of consciousness. The wolf bite was bad, torn deep into muscle and infection already threatened. She stitched what she could, bound it tight, and fed him small sips of water when he could swallow. Fever took him hard near dawn, his body shaking, breath coming ragged as he muttered names she did not recognize. She learned his name that way? Caleb Mercer. He spoke it once like a confession and again like a prayer. Eliza sat beside him, changing cloths, stoking the fire, speaking softly into the quiet cabin as though he could hear her. She told him where he was, that the wolves were gone, that he was safe for now. She did not expect him to live. Too many men had died in that bed before him. Her father, neighbors, strangers pulled from snow or water too late. Hope was a dangerous thing. Still, when dawn broke pale and cold through the window and Caleb's breathing steadied just enough, she allowed herself a single, fragile breath of relief. Days passed in a blur of work and watchfulness. The wolves lingered outside at night, pacing, howling, testing the edges of her courage. But they did not return to the door. Caleb's fever raged and broke in waves, leaving him weak and hollow-eyed. When he finally woke fully, it was to the sound of Eliza chopping wood outside, the steady rhythm grounding him to the world again. He watched her through the window like a man relearning how to exist, noticing the set of her shoulders, the way her hair escaped its tie, the competence in every movement. When she came inside, he tried to sit up and failed, a sharp breath escaping him. Eliza crossed the room in 2 strides and pushed him back down with a firm hand. "You'll stay still if you want to keep that leg," she said flatly. He studied her then, really looked at her, his gaze steady and curious rather than demanding. "You saved me," he said quietly, the words carrying weight. "I didn't let you die," she corrected. "There's a difference." He smiled faintly at that, something warm flickering in his eyes. "Still counts." Caleb told her his story in pieces over the next few days, when his strength allowed. He was a cowboy by trade, driven north with a small herd before a storm scattered them. Wolves took his horse, then nearly took him. He had thought himself dead until the lantern light cut through the dark. Eliza listened without interrupting, without offering pity, though something in his quiet resilience stirred, something long dormant in her chest. She did not speak of herself unless pressed, and even then only in fragments. Her father, the cabin, the years alone. Caleb did not push. He watched instead, learning her silences, respecting them. The cabin grew warmer with shared presence, the nights less heavy, though danger still prowled just beyond the walls. One night, when the wolves howled closer than they had since his rescue, Caleb reached for the rifle by the bed without thinking, pain flashing across his face. Eliza caught his hand, pressing it down gently. "You're not ready," she said. "But you will be." Their eyes held in the firelight, something unspoken passing between them, fragile and new and terrifying in its possibility. By the time Caleb could stand on his own, leaning heavily on a stick Eliza fashioned for him, the snow had begun to melt in slow, grudging patches. The wolves faded back into the higher ridges, hunger easing as spring threatened the valley. Caleb helped where he could, chopping wood, sitting down, mending small things, refusing to be useless despite the pain. Eliza found herself speaking more, laughing once, a sound so unfamiliar it startled them both. He told her he would leave when he was strong enough. She nodded and said nothing, but the thought hollowed something in her chest she had not known was there. She reminded herself that people passed through, that nothing stayed, that expecting otherwise was a mistake she could not afford. One evening, as the sky burned gold behind the pines, Caleb stood at the door and looked out over the valley, quiet and vast. "You shouldn't be alone out here," he said softly. Eliza crossed her arms, defensive. "I've managed."
"I know," he replied.
"That's what scares me." She met his gaze then, something sharp and honest passing between them. Neither spoke of marriage, or futures, or promises, But the seed was planted, deep and dangerous, waiting, and somewhere beyond the ridges, the wolves lifted their heads one last time and howled, not for hunger, but for change. Spring did not arrive all at once. It crept into the valley like a cautious guest, testing the ground before committing, melting snow in narrow veins along the creek beds and softening the air just enough to remind Eliza Hawthorne that seasons could change without asking permission. Caleb Mercer healed in that same hesitant way. Each morning he stood a little straighter, leaned less on the stick, moved with the careful patience of a man who understood how close death had come and how foolish it would be to challenge fate too soon. With his strength returning came the world beyond the valley. Riders began passing through again, trappers, a mail carrier, a pair of drovers pushing cattle north. Eliza watched from the cabin window as Caleb spoke with them, saw how easily he slipped back into that language of men and movement, of destinations and plans. It unsettled her more than the wolves ever had. She had rescued a dying man, not invited the outside world into her carefully contained solitude. Caleb noticed the change in her before she spoke of it. One evening, after a rider passed without stopping, he said quietly, "You think I'll leave the same way they do?" Eliza kept her eyes on the kettle. "You will," she replied. "That's what people do." He did not argue. He only nodded, as though accepting a truth already weighed and measured. "I told you I'd go when I was able, and you're nearly able," she said, too quickly. The words hung between them, heavier than either expected. That night, Eliza lay awake, listening to the familiar sounds of the cabin, the settling wood, the wind in the eaves, but they felt different now, as though the silence itself had learned to wait. She wondered what would remain when Caleb left. Not the wolves, not the loneliness, those she understood, but the echo of a presence she had not known she was capable of missing. The danger returned before either of them could speak of it plainly. Wolves came down from the ridges again, leaner than before, driven by desperation rather than hunger alone. One afternoon, as Caleb worked clumsily at repairing a fence line near the tree edge, the howls rose sudden and close. Eliza grabbed the rifle and ran, heart-pounding not with fear for herself, but with something far worse. She found Caleb braced against a post, rifle raised, jaw set. The wolves circled at a distance, testing, remembering. Eliza stepped beside him without thinking, their shoulders nearly touching, two figures framed against the open valley. She fired once, clean and sharp, and Caleb fired after her. The wolves retreated, but not without promise in their eyes. When the echoes faded, Caleb lowered the rifle slowly and looked at her. "You came running," he said. "You're slow," she replied. Though her voice shook, that night he admitted what she already knew. "If I leave now, they'll come back harder. They remember this place." Eliza swallowed. "Then leave when they forget." "And you?" he asked. She had no answer for that. Caleb could have left. The road was open, his legs strong enough to ride, his old life waiting somewhere beyond the trees. Instead he stayed, not as a guest, not as a man recovering, but as someone who chose the valley and the woman who lived there. He reinforced the cabin, helped build a second corral, trapped where wolves might pass, and took the night watches without complaint. Eliza fought the growing truth with everything she had. She told herself his presence was practical, temporary, born of circumstance rather than feeling. But the way he learned her rhythms, the way he waited for her to speak instead of filling the silence, the way he never once treated her solitude as something to fix, it wore her down in the gentlest way possible. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat outside watching the sky darken. Caleb spoke then, not of plans or leaving, but of the past he rarely touched. He told her of a woman he once thought he'd marry, lost to illness on a trail west, of how he'd learned not to promise futures he couldn't protect. Eliza listened, understanding too well the cost of loving something the world could take away. "I don't want to owe you anything," she said finally. "Not for saving you, not for staying." He turned to her serious. "Then don't let me stay because of that." She met his gaze. "And if I ask you to?" His answer came without hesitation. Then I'll stay because you asked. The wolves came again near the end of spring, bolder, more desperate. This time they attacked the livestock. Caleb and Eliza fought side by side, moving as though they had always done so, shots echoing through the valley, firelight flaring in the dark. When it was over, the wolves fled for good, leaving behind silence reclaimed. In the aftermath, as dawn broke over torn earth and trampled snow, Caleb took Eliza's hands, his grip steady, grounding. "I don't want to leave," he said simply, "but I won't trap you with that." Eliza looked at the valley, her valley, once a refuge from the world, now something shared. She saw not loss, but possibility, terrifying, fragile possibility. "If you stay," she said slowly, "it won't be as a guest." He smiled then, not triumphant, but humbled. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The proposal did not come on one knee, nor with ceremony or witnesses. It came on an ordinary morning, when the valley lay quiet and the cabin smelled of fresh bread. Caleb stood by the table, awkward and unsure in a way Eliza had never seen him before. "I don't have much," he said. "Just what I can build, what I can protect, and what I can promise to keep choosing." Eliza set down the knife, her hand steady. "I don't need more than that." They married weeks later under a pine tree, the creek murmuring nearby. A trapper passing through stood witness, awkwardly honored. There was no dress but Eliza's best work gown. No ring but a simple band Caleb traded for in town. It was enough, more than enough. Life did not soften for them. Winters still came hard, storms still raged, danger still prowled at the edges of the world. But Eliza was no longer alone in listening for it. And Caleb no longer wandered without anchor. The cabin grew stronger, warmer, filled with shared work and shared silence, the kind that no longer ached. On a quiet evening years later, Eliza stood at the door, watching the ridges darken, wolves howling faint and distant once more. Caleb came up behind her, resting a hand at her back. "They still sing," he said. "Yes," she replied, leaning into him, "but they don't come here anymore." And they never did again.